follow along.
Very good. So the verse that we're going to talk about from the portion of Kiseitse is, welcome David, chapter 22 in the book of Deuteronomy, verse number 8.
Wait 1 second.
22 verse 8. Last week's Torah portion was the Torah portion that has the most mitzvahs in the whole Torah. 74 mitzvahs in last week's Torah portion. Out of the 613, that's more than 10%. So more than 10% of the 613 mitzvahs that we are commanded to observe, whether the positive and the prohibited things or negative things, were in last week's parsha. So we're looking at chapter 22, verse which one did I say? Verse 8. Here we are.
Oh, the guardrail for your roof?
Yes, the guardrail for your roof. This is actually the mitzvah, which is the source for us for making sure that our property is safe and secure. So it's not just about a roof; it's about anything that we own or specifically a location that could cause danger. So it could also be a pit. It doesn't necessarily have to be a roof. If somebody has a pit in their yard and there are people you're walking around, they have to make sure to put a wall around the pit also. The verse says as follows. I thought I had it, but I didn't. 22 verse 8. Oh, okay. Ki tivne bayit chadash. When you build, this is Noga. Welcome. We're on chapter 22, verse 8. When you build a new house, you should make a fence for your roof. You should not allow blood to come to be in your home. What would be the blood? What would cause blood? That the one who is the one, somebody will fall. Actually, the way it's translated, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on, is the faller will fall from it. So the fallen one will fall from it. So if your roof is somewhere where people are able to climb, so rooftop where people are able to go onto, and you leave it without a fence, then somebody could fall and they could get killed, they could get hurt, whatever it is, that would be causing blood, so therefore we have to make a fence around our roof. That's the verse. We'll come back to the verse a little bit later. But for now, there's a couple interesting things in Jewish law. A synagogue or a study hall is not obligated to have a fence around its roof. That's number one. That's a general law. The temple, the Holy Temple, had a special fence around parts of its roof. So the temple, a lot of it was open. The Azara, the Ezra's, the big courtyard when people came in, and the second courtyard where the Cohens would be. But there was a part which was where the Holy of Holies was, and where the menorah was, also the sanctuary. The sanctuary the sanctuary had a roof on top of it, and that roof had a special fence around its roof. Now, there's different explanations of what that fence was, but according to the way it's being explained in the Talmud, in the Midrash, this fence was in order to fulfill this mitzvah, that nobody should fall off. Were people climbing on the roof? I don't know if many people were climbing there, besides if they went there to fix it. But there was a commandment that they had to have a fence around it. And the big question is, what is the difference between a synagogue and a temple? Why is it that a synagogue is exempt from having a fence around its roof to keep people safe and secure? And why is it? And the temple was obligated to have. So there's a couple different explanations that we could give. There's an explanation from the Rogatchover, who was a great sage in the beginning of last century. He actually I'm not sure exactly what year he passed away, but he was an incredible mind, and he wrote books with very, very deep ideas and an analysis of Talmud and Jewish law. He says the temple was different because the temple was built. The temple was built by it wasn't built as a holy building. So the law is, if somebody that when they would build a temple, they wouldn't yet they wouldn't officially sanctify the object, the stone or the wood or whatever it was they were using to build it. They would keep it mundane. So it was just regular wood and regular stone or whatever it was, regular gold. And after it was already built, they said, now we're going to turn it into we're going to dedicate it as a temple. The reason for that was
background.
There's noise in the background.
It was a click,
There
click,
was.
click, click.
Right, there was. It stopped.
I'm
Just
sorry.
mute everybody if you're not talking.
I didn't hear it, so it's not. It was from my end. It wasn't from anybody else.
I don't know. We should mute everybody if we're not talking. That way we won't have any disturbances.
Okay.
But it's fine.
Let's see if it's simple to do.
It's simple for you to do.
Is there any noise right now?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me see. Mute all. Okay, there we go. Okay. Everybody could unmute themselves if they need. I'm saying if you want to share something, please do. There we go. So the temple was not dedicated before it was built. It was dedicated after it was built. So it was built. The reason being that they didn't want the workers that were building the temple, which is really the entire Jewish people, to use it. While they were building it, they might lean on it. They might use it in a not respectful way because they're going to be working there. So let's consider it to be mundane, and only dedicate it afterwards. So usually, when you give something when you give a donation to a shul, where you give an object to a synagogue, whatever it is, that synagogue, that object gains a certain level of holiness. In this case, it wasn't holy yet; it was kept mundane. So therefore, he says, a temple, a holy space, like a synagogue or a study hall, doesn't need to have a fence around it, according to Jewish law. We'll talk about that in a second. Why? But the temple was not a holy place. It was built mundane, so it was allowed to. So you were able. So they could. So therefore, there was an obligation to put a fence around it. But there's reasons it's hard to accept that explanation. The way the Rebbe explains it is because the way the Rebbe explains why it's hard to accept that explanation. He says because the reason why a synagogue doesn't have to have a roof, doesn't have to have a fence, is because the verse says you should make a fence for your roof, legagecha, your roof. So it's not make a fence around the roof; it's make a fence around your roof. So since the synagogue doesn't belong to a specific individual, therefore there's an exemption from putting a fence around it. And in this case, also the temple didn't belong to a specific individual, even though it wasn't yet dedicated. The fact is that they collected it was a joint thing. So there's no reason why there should be a obligation on individuals to make fences when it doesn't belong to a specific individual.
It also says a house, not just a building.
Well, Beis Hamikdash is the holy temple, right? So the Beis Hamikdash is also a house. A house could mean a bias or Beis HaKnesses is a synagogue, so it's also a house. So bayit is a general word that's used. A home for many different, could be a home for all different things. It doesn't necessarily mean a home for, but that's a good point. And there are things that we learn from the word house. It says house. It means it has to be something permanent. It can't be something temporary. Now, there's an interesting teaching from Rashi. Rashi says,
Where are we?
We are in the last week's Torah portion in chapter 22, verse 8. We're talking about one verse that we're discussing, because every verse in last week's Torah portion is kind of its own thing. There's so many different mitzvahs that are spoken about, and they're all different verses. We're talking about the one of making a fence around the roof. So
So Rabbi, somehow your microphone is picking up all kinds of background noise. It doesn't usually, but it is this time.
So I am going to. This is now you're not gonna hear me in a second probably. If you do hear me, give me a nod. If not, I'm gonna go off and come right back on because I have to. My microphone is. Do you hear me? You hear me? Okay, wonderful. Okay, is it better now? Is the sound a bit better?
Yes.
Okay. My apologies about all of that. Rashi says, here's a law. The law is that if a house is owned by two partners, two people, then it is obligated to have a fence around it. Even though it says your roof, which could be sometimes when we say yours, it could be very specific. It could be singular. It could be to a specific person. So if it belongs to multiple people, maybe not. But in the case of a house of partners, we say it's still obligated to have a fence. Why? Because of the danger that could happen. So it doesn't make it. There's a reason over here. There's a reason. The Torah gives us a reason why there has to be a fence. It's not just to do with the specifics of if it belongs to one person or two people or five people. It says because somebody could fall off it. So whether it belongs to two people or five people or one person, still somebody could fall off it. So you have to have a fence around it. Rashi says, but a synagogue has a bit of a different case. There's still a reason. The reason still applies, and therefore we should probably put the fence there if we can. But there's no specific obligation on an individual. Because if somebody falls off it, let's say, who's going to be held accountable? Who's going to be liable for what happened? If you're going to say the people that built the synagogue should be liable, or the people of the city who collected the money for the synagogue, what they could say, I'm paraphrasing Rashi. It's not the words he says are very very specific, but this is to explain a bit more. What's going to happen is the people of the city are going to say, no, it doesn't only belong to us; it belongs to the entire Jewish people. A synagogue doesn't belong to individuals; a synagogue belongs to the entire Jewish people. So why am I liable? Go to Australia and make the people over there liable for the person that fell off it. So we're all liable. Everyone is. So because we can't specifically point a finger at somebody and say they're liable, we also can't come along and tell a certain individual or many individuals that they are obligated to put the fence. The obligation doesn't go on any specific person. There is no specific obligation on an individual. Therefore, if we want to go and put a fence, if somebody goes out of their goodwill and says, I don't want people to fall, I'm going to put a fence, then it's a nice mitzvah, but that's not an obligation that any specific person is obligated in. The temple, on the other hand, this is how the Rebbe explains it, is a little bit different. It's more like a house that belongs to partners. Because when King David built the temple, he first gave there was somebody who occupied that land called Aravna the Yevusite, even though the Jewish people drove the other nations out of the land of Israel. But when it came to that land specifically, and a few other places actually, the places that are under the biggest that have the most some of the places that have the most disagreement and between the Jewish people, I wouldn't say disagreement, but the most fighting between the Arabs and the Jewish people are places that were actually purchased in biblical times, were purchased by the Jewish people, like Hebron, for example, which Abraham bought. The same thing with this land, with the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount was purchased by King David. King David gave money to Aravna HaYevusi, who owned that land previously. And in order to pay him, we're not going to get into the details of the story, but in order to pay him the money, he collected money from all the different tribes. So all of the Jewish people gave, or representatives of all the Jewish people from all the different groups, all the different tribes, gave money to King David to be able to be part of that purchase. And when it came to building it, when it came to that's regarding the land. How about the supplies that were used to build it? So we don't have any specific. It doesn't say anywhere specifically where the supplies, how all the supplies came together. But we know when it came to the tabernacle, the Mishkan, we have the whole story in the book of Exodus, where everybody came along, everybody brought their possessions. It was a collective thing that everybody came, each person came and donated to the temple. There was nobody that was left out. Everybody gave something that they owned to the temple, and it was too much, which is why Moses had to tell them to stop. So we could probably say the same thing was by the temple, that everybody took part. All the Jewish people donated towards the temple. Now there is a law. We're doing a lot of halachic analysis over here. Soon we're going to go over to the Chassidus and the teaching in our service of Hashem. But there is a law that if somebody donates something to the congregation, to the temple, to the synagogue, to an organization which is there to serve the congregation, to serve the community, then once they've donated what they've given, it's no longer theirs. They give it over to the congregation. They don't have any more. There's no part which is still theirs. However, we have another story in the Torah which shows us that there is still a certain part. There is still a part which they hold on to, and that is in the story of Korach. When Korach gathered Jewish people to protest against Moses, and Moses and Aaron were taking all of the high positions for themselves, and they weren't being inclusive according to the way they understood it, or the way they explained it. So Moses says, he turns to God and he says, don't turn towards their offerings. Don't accept their offerings. And the Midrash tells us which offering is it talking about. The simple explanation is it's talking about the incense that they were offering. But the Midrash tells us that, well, it's referring to their part in the communal offerings. Every day there's an obligation that two animals should be offered up on the altar. 2 sheep, the tamid, the communal, the daily offering. And Moses was saying this offering is given to be able to buy these animals. All the Jewish people give money to the temple. And even though they're donating it to the temple and it would become no longer theirs, it's something. There's still a part of it which is theirs. And therefore, he's saying to God, when you're going to accept and you're going to burn up the offering on the altar, don't take their part. Leave their part out. So we see that when people collectively, many different individuals give towards a certain cause, they still have a certain part in it. They still have a certain ownership in it. And therefore, when it comes to the Holy Temple, it belongs to many, many different partners together, the entire Jewish people. The entire Jewish people were part of buying the land, giving money towards buying the land from Eravna the Yevusi. And the entire Jewish people gave supplies to donated towards building it. And therefore, it has an obligation to have a roof, to have a fence around the roof, because it's a house of partners. It's not a house which nobody could be liable for. Yes, we're all liable. We're all liable for the temple. Go on, David. Yeah.
This makes no sense to me that the synagogue has no one liable for it, because somebody had to put together the money to build it. Somebody had to put together the plans. Someone was working as an agent for the other people. So it was a collective effort somehow, and there was an agent for it, and they did a design. And that agent could just as easily have to design something safe on the roof. So I feel like there's something missing in this logic.
Mm-hmm. Yep, makes no sense, this logic.
Again, the logic the way I explained it makes sense, but you have a different question. In other words, the liability part has an explanation. You can't hold a certain person liable for this building. This building is a building which the entire Jewish people need it in order to be a place to serve God.
But I don't buy that, because if they designed it in a flawed way and it collapsed.
It's not designed in a flawed way. I'm sorry, if you make a roof.
No, I'm talking about a synagogue. I'm talking about the synagogue.
Yes. You build a synagogue.
If you make a synagogue, no, I'm saying if you make a synagogue, let me give the whole explanation. It all fits together. If you make a synagogue in a flawed way, somebody's responsible for having designed it in a flawed way. So they worked as an agent for someone, even though the synagogue's owned by everyone. there's still a responsibility that falls on someone in this collective endeavor, because they were working, the designer is an agent for them. So I don't see why there can't be another agent that's responsible to make sure that it's safe. And even though it's owned by everybody, doesn't take away the fact that someone's in there in the design, and they could include that as part of the design.
But which individual is obligated in paying for that agent?
Who paid
Yes,
for
what
the
does it
synagogue?
matter? What does
Somebody
it
was
matter?
obligated to pay for the synagogue, or you
Nobody-
wouldn't have a synagogue. It wasn't every Jewish person. So there's a committee for every synagogue that raises funds from someplace, decides a design and puts it together. And that same group could be liable for the fence. I just don't get it. It makes no sense to me that they wouldn't be, because
According to Jewish law, those people, according to the basic Jewish law, and obviously, what about a synagogue that has members, and what about a synagogue if they have some meshuggah that runs around the shul? You're allowed to kick him out. Who can tell them to leave the shul if it belongs to the entire Jewish people? There's lots of things that we could ask questions on. What about synagogues that have homes for the rabbi or for the chazan that lives in the synagogue? There's all sorts of questions that we could ask. But according to basic Jewish law, these individuals that collected the money, that was a very nice mitzvah that they did, but it doesn't. And we could say that in a certain city, the city has to make sure they have synagogues, and they have to make sure they have schools also. But that doesn't mean that they are liable for for mistakes that go into the building of the synagogue. If they hire an agent, then the agent is liable because the agent got paid for it as an individual.
So
But
it doesn't make sense within the sentence. If you just go back to reading the pasuk, it says very clearly, when you build a new home, you will make a makeh. How do you say makeh?
Fence.
A fence on the roof, so that you will not have blood in your home, so that someone won't fall from it. Now, it doesn't say if it's a public place, you don't have to take care of it. It just says any home that you build.
Again, there's a contradiction in what you just said. In a public place, you have to take care of it. Who's you? Who is you that has to take care of it?
Well, the Hebrew is, I think, to me anyway, it's very clear. It says
V'asita, and you should make. V'asita means that you should make. Who is you?
ki tivneh, that's when you shall build bait chadash, a new home. V'asita makeh. Asita it's true that it just says masculine individual, but it is used all through the Torah as a rule, a general rule.
A general rule to individuals.
For everything. Look at anywhere else here, and it's the same thing. It talks. This entire parasha is filled with things that are talking to the individual, but it's clear that it's to everybody.
As individuals. Everybody as individuals. I could give you an example that backs up what you're saying. It says that you should build a temple, right? In the Parshas Tetzaveh, in Teruma, it says you should build a temple, and I'll dwell among them. Who's you? Every single Jew is obligated to build a temple.
So if every single Jew is obligated to put a fence over the roof, then everybody has to do it, including if they're building a synagogue.
This verse is talking about an individual. It says it's gagecha. It's.
But a synagogue is built from a bunch of individuals, right?
A synagogue is built from a synagogue is built from a bunch of individuals, but those individuals represent the entire Jewish people. They're not individuals that have obligation for themselves. They're individuals that represent the entire Jewish people. If in a certain city, if they build a synagogue, yes, the community is obligated to build synagogues and to build schools and to make sure we have Jewish infrastructure and to build mikvahs and everything else. But those in this case of a synagogue specifically, those individuals represent the entire Jewish people. They're the ones in the city. They have to build it, but they represent the entire Jewish people. And the entire Jewish people has rights to that synagogue. The entire Jewish people could walk in and could use the furniture in the synagogue and to wear and tear and to take whatever it is. and the entire Jewish people has the right to go up on the roof and to choose not to go up on the roof and to build a fence if they want. But again, it doesn't go on a specific individual. Anyways, I don't. The halacha is, there's very lot of intricacies over here, and you're right that this doesn't mean that we leave synagogues, with open space for kids to fall off the roof. Of course, we build a playground. You build something. Every person with a right mind understands there are certain things that there's certain things which are added on that need to be done, even though according to basic Jewish law it wasn't obligated. Whereas the temple was obligated according to basic Jewish law.
When I read this sentence, I also don't think about it just as a specific thing like this. It's more about setting limits to be careful to take care of other people.
That's how Jewish law talks about it. Exactly. If you have a pit in your yard, it's the same thing. It's not just a roof. It's not just a roof without a fence. It's a pit without a fence around it, or a big rock that's in front of your front door that somebody could bang into and fall and hurt themselves. So it's all the same thing.
So was there a rabbinic rule that you should build it? Because often when a Jewish law doesn't cover something, the rabbis come together and say, well, we'll add this in. Was that ever done in this case?
Asking a good question. You're asking a good question. I don't know the answer offhand. I just know the basic. I know the basic teaching over here. There are many, many sources that with lots of different places to look up. So I'll check and let you know the answer next week when we get together.
Because it would seem to me that this is so basic when it comes to safety that even if electrically it gets through in a loophole, the rabbis would have the good sense to say, let's add a fence. Like a fence around everything. They like to add so you're careful to do the right thing.
Right. Siag. It's all the time. Siag la Torah. Every time you're adding another fence and another fence and another fence, right? That's what the Jewish thing is. It's always adding more fences.
It's very right. It's very possible that the rabbis said that you should build a fence. The question is who they said is obligated in doing that. Who is the liability on? And that's the question that I have over here, which is yes, but it's not just about getting around the loophole. It's about how do we see it from the perspective of Jewish law? Does it become who are we giving that responsibility to? And the answer is probably going to be the people of the city that are obligated to build synagogues are also obligated to build.
Whoever designed it, and they're the agent. And if you say an agent needs to get paid, in U.S. terms, you could pay them $1, but to make sure that it holds. But they are working on behalf of all the Jewish people to design a synagogue and do all of this, whether they're paid or not. That's kind of an agent role. And so they should also have a liability, because if you do things wrong, you don't just get out of them because if you're incompetent or you broke the rules. Let's say you bought the wrong cement. Right now, at least in regular law, if you build a building with the wrong cement and there's an earthquake and it collapses, you're liable. And so here, I can't believe Jewish law wouldn't at least have the minimums that we have in non-Jewish law around things of safety in building buildings.
Right.
Basically, we don't understand. Again,
there's the basic law, the biblical thing over here. Why a temple is specifically obligated, a synagogue is not, based on the verse how we learn it and based on the oral Torah, and of course there's much more to that which we could expound on. But the logic is that there's no specific person that's liable. Anyways.
So I think that's great, but I think part of what we're doing is how should one live their life?
And we gotta get
and that's why the rabbis are important, because if the rabbis aren't giving us guidance on living our life, if there's a loophole in Jewish law that lets you do something that at some level creates this danger and we don't call for it otherwise, then for me, that's a red flag that we're somehow skirting what Hashem wants for us.
I'm sure there's more. I'm sure there's much more to this. But I want to move over to the Chassidus part. I don't want to miss this part, which is really
which is what you're trying to get us to, and we're stuck on why. Yes,
No. Well, look. What I did was I took you through 4 pages of this that has all these little sources on the bottom. You look at these. Look at I don't know if you can see clearly, but like this is
Yeah, it looks pretty bad.
and I skipped some of the top also. So this is a lot. There's a lot on it, and all your questions and all the discussion on this has a lot of space and is discussed in Jewish law. So that's beyond my expertise and beyond the time that we have. So that's maybe if I open up the books, I would be able to yeah. The deeper Kabbalistic explanation of here in this verse is that the roof represents ego. It represents the high up part, the part which is on top, person's ego, arrogance, gava. We are commanded that we have to always put fences around us. We have to work on limiting or work on being aware of our ego. That we have a fence around us that we don't allow something to fall, which means which means dropping in our spiritual service of Hashem and other people's service of Hashem. So making sure falling means falling down from our spiritual height of where we're supposed to be. Ego gets in the way of that. So the Torah tells us, build a fence. Make sure that you are aware and that you are always working on controlling the whatever it is and refining your ego. That way, the faller won't fall. One might think that when is there an obligation of being aware and refining our ego when we're dealing with something which is mundane, my personal home, something which is not holy. When we're talking about the holy temple, which is the holiest place, even more than the synagogues, and it says that the height of the temple represents height in service of Hashem. So the height in this case is not a negative thing, you might think. So if so, why is there a need for a fence? And even more so in the temple, it wasn't the outer part of the temple that had the fence. It was the holiest part, the Holy of Holies, that had the fence on top of it. Why does it need a fence if it's such a holy place? What could go wrong from this kind of ego, from this kind of height? This kind of height is only going to bring good things. So we say there's a law that that the vessels have to be dipped in the mikveh before we use them. If something was made fully pure and there's no way that it could have become contaminated and become impure, it still has to be dipped in the mikveh. Because even something which is completely pure and something which is you might think is complete and there's no place for holes, there's no place for anything bad to happen, also needs to have bittul. Tevila, the word tovel, which means to immerse in the mikveh, also has the same words as the word bittul, which means humility. So even when it comes to holy things, there has to be refining. Why? What's happening? What are we saying over here? A fence is not just to protect me. The main purpose of what the verse says is ki yipol hanofel mimeno, because the faller, somebody else, another individual will fall from it. Of course, it's me also. I have to protect myself. But the point of the verse is pointing out is somebody else. When a person is egotistic, when a person is arrogant, even when they're caught up with service of Hashem, even when they're using out their, even when they're helping, teaching another person, inspiring another person, connecting with another person in order to bring them closer to God. Mm-hmm. Having arrogance causes the opposite. Having arrogance, first, it gives the other person the feeling that there's a bias over here. There's an agenda. This person is caught up with himself. They don't care only about God and about the thing that they're trying to teach. They are caught up with their own self. In order to have words that go from the heart, from one person's heart to another person's heart, there has to be openness. It has to be complete, and it has to be open all the way through, without things in the way, without those blockages that tell the other person, this is not for me, Or even more so, not only is it not for me, I want to stay away from this, which is an even step further, because this is arrogant. There's an interesting teaching in the Midrash. This is getting back to out of Chassidus for a second. The Midrash says, why does it say ki yipol hanofel mimenu, that the faller will fall? It should say ki yipol ha'adam mimenu, the person will fall. What is
Maybe it's not just people.
ki yipol davar mimenu, that something will fall from it? What is nofel? Nofel is pointing out that the nofel means the faller. The fall, in other words, what it actually, if you translate the words literally, doesn't make sense like this, is because the fallen will fall from it. The fallen will fall. What's happening over here? The Talmud says that this person that falls was actually supposed to fall. God, they did something wrong, or they had their own issues. And God arranged that they should fall, and that this should happen to them. Things happen to people, and it's all we don't understand God's cheshbonot, God's calculation of things. But somebody was supposed to fall, and they fell from your roof. It doesn't mean that you're not responsible. I have to make sure that the fallers don't fall from my roof. Let them fall from somebody else's roof. Let God be stuck with nobody's roof for them to fall off. But the fact is that they were fallen. They were supposed to get this. There's a whole thing in the Midrash, somebody that kills by mistake has to go to the cities of refuge, right?
Yeah.
What happens if somebody kills on purpose? Then they're liable to the death penalty.
Right.
According to Jewish law. What happens if there was no witnesses in both cases? There was no witnesses that saw the one killed on purpose, and there was no witnesses that saw the one that killed by mistake. So then they both run away. The one that killed by mistake, nobody can hurt him because nobody saw me kill. And the person who killed on purpose, he killed on purpose, and he got away with it. He got away with murder. Nobody saw him. There's nobody to bring him to the Beis Din. So Hashem saw it. So what does Hashem do? Hashem says, I'll make the one who killed on purpose, I'll make the one who killed by mistake, fall off the roof, and fall onto the guy who killed on purpose. He'll die. The guy that killed on purpose will die from the weight of the other person that falls on him. So he gets what he was liable for, and the other guy will be seen. Everyone will see you went and you caused this other person to die by mistake. You've got to go to the cities of refuge. So that way, God makes all arrangements that the faller should fall in the right place. That's all the teaching. So going back to the service of Hashem, to the Hasidic teaching, what can I say? This person is anyway a faller. My ego distanced them. The distance, the ego, because of one person has an ego. That's why they should be liable for somebody else falling. The other person was anyways gonna fall. They were anyways not gonna get any closer to God. They were anyways gonna get more distant from God. So why are you blaming that the person that's teaching them? If they were actually smart enough, if they actually refined enough, if they actually had the abilities, and they would take the peel, throw it away, and keep the good stuff. Take the good thing that they're learning and throw away the ego part. Why are they getting distance from serving Hashem? Because they're seeing somebody else's ego. Say, no, that's not your business. Your business is that your ego and you're having ga'ava and you're having arrogance distances the other person from serving Hashem. You're liable for your roof. Whether they were going to fall anyways, that's not your business. And you have to do your part to make sure that your roof has a fence around it. Even if you're teaching, even if it's your temple, even if you're teaching holy things and teaching about God. But then you can have the other extreme, which is somebody will say, this is just too hard. Teaching and inspiring others and helping others become closer to Hashem. Why should I get involved in it? I'm going to become liable for somebody else's falling. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm not going to be able to one person's not going to really be able to refine their ego. So therefore, and I'm never going to be good enough. So just stay away from it. Sit down, take care of my own business, not deal with other people's business, and I'm good. Everything is good. We say no. According to Chassidus, when the Torah tells us that this verse, that when you build a new house, the mitzvah is not just the fence. The mitzvah, the blessing to do the blessing is also building the house. Every single person was given their new house, which is new. Every person has something which they give to the world, which they contribute. And nobody else can do what you have to do. And the people that your acquaintances that you encounter are your encounters. Nobody else is encountering them in this moment. That's your bayit chadash, your new home. You have the abilities to use out that new home in a way which will be safe or in a way that will be dangerous. But you can't choose whether you're going to build the home or not. Every single person has a new home. Every single person has something they contribute. God created every single individual and every single thing in the world for a purpose. And if your purpose is, if you encounter these people and you have this family and these friends and the people that you encounter, your job is to inspire them and to teach them. And you can't be exempt from that responsibility. So it's a responsibility, and it also comes with the blessing that God gives the ability to do this. There's a story of the Mittler Rebbe, the second Lubavitcher Rebbe, that people would come to him for the month of Tishrei to spend the month of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and all the holidays in his presence. And on the way back, the Hasidim that would go back all the different towns in Russia, they would go through different townlets on their way home to wherever their cities were. And what he wanted for them was that they should teach what they had learned in Lubavitch, in the town where the Mittler Rebbe was, to all of the different people in the different towns on their way home. Shouldn't just keep it for themselves. There was one chassid who had a very great, he was a smart guy, and he also had a lot of skill in giving over his teachings. He was able to give over very beautifully. And he came to the Mittler Rebbe and he said, I can't handle this. It's giving me too much arrogance. Every time I sit around in the city and I teach, all these people gather around me and they come to listen to me, and I'm feeling so good about myself, and this is not good. I'm having arrogance. I should just not do this. So the Mittler Rebbe said to him in Yiddish, anyone knows a little bit of Yiddish? A Zibbelef soll von dir werden, aber Chassidus sollst du chasren. You could become an onion, but Chassidus you have to teach. You can become sharp, and that's not your business. You got to do what you have to do. Your job is your job. Turn into an onion, and the way the rabbi explains it is an onion actually adds flavor. Onion is very sharp. It's like scary from the outside. It causes us to have tears. But if we put a little bit of onion in, we have flavor. A little bit of using your creativity and your skill is going to actually add. So don't get caught up with, I'm not going to do this. Do it and do your best to make the fence around it. And that's where the temple comes in. The temple is different than a shul. In a shul is all about my service of God. I go into the shul to serve Hashem. I go there to pray, to study. It's my little sanctuary where I serve Hashem and where I become better, more holier, and more connected. But the temple, the windows in the temple faced outwards. Instead of the windowsills being inwards, the windows faced outwards, because it says, and the menorah, the candles of the menorah, the cups of the menorah would face downwards also, and the lights would shine outwards, because the temple is all about shining to the world. Temple is about giving to others. And when it comes to giving, when it comes to shining to the world and giving others, and taking the mundane that we have and making it holy to serve Hashem, which is what they did with the sacrifices. They took their belongings and they took their sacrifices and they gave it to the temple to become holy. Then we have to, we're helping others become more connected to Hashem. When it comes to that, we have to make sure there's a fence around us, that we don't let our arrogance and our gaiva distance another person. Rather, while we're doing our job, which we have to do, we make sure that we are always refining ourselves to become more clean of anything which will be a blockage to anybody else receiving, and a blockage to ourselves that cause us to fall also. So that's the teaching from this verse. With that, we still finished late. Still a minute late.
No, we're good. We're good.
Now we could get into the halakhic analysis if anybody wants to hang around. My kids are not home yet. Kids are not home yet. But you good questions. Your question. I want to point something out. You know, these questions that we have are questions which are very logical questions. You know, if somebody could fall, the verse says, because somebody will fall. Who cares if it's a synagogue or if it's this, if it's that? Somebody's going to fall. Make sure it's protected. But here and we're not. You know, the community, the rabbis never leave these things out. They never let people fall. That's not the point of it. That's not the point. There is many halakhic intricacies that we have to take apart until we get to that point. And we have multiple different opinions and multiple different things, and understanding each one of them according to their fullest only helps us come to the better answer afterwards, which explains to us where is it that the rabbis did institute this fence around the roof. So I'm sure you will not find synagogues without fences around them. And if you find that there's no fence around them, you could probably blame a specific person. How did we get to that place? I don't know. And it's in order to get there, we have to understand all the intricacies until then. And the agent, David, 1 second, I just want to point out, the agent is the agent that's hired by the entire Jewish people. So yes, the agent is liable for what they're hired for, but what is the entire Jewish people liable and obligated to hire for? What do they have to hire? Do they have to hire? Do we have to build a shul? Maybe I could not build a shul altogether. These are all the questions that come up when we're trying to understand this. Go on.
So the Hasidus is very easy for me to buy. I understand it. It makes sense. On the Jewish law, what I wonder is, if Sturny's father were here talking to us, would that be easy to buy too? In other words, could he cut through those intricacies because of his deep knowledge and make it as crystal clear as you do the Hasidus? That's the question I'm left with.
But I think what he would do is he would tell you right away at the beginning that there is an obligation in today's times, and it's based on this and this. And then we'll go back to the original Talmudic study, which is why a temple is different than a shul. Because I think that would calm the nerves of how could it be that someone could fall off the shul? Which is a great question, which I'm left with also. And maybe
you could, instead of doing all the research, maybe you could talk to him about it and say this came up, and there was a request to hear what you would have to say about it.
I will do. I will
at that level.
Yes, I'm sure he'll be more than happy.
You also have to remember that the synagogue today is not what it was then, so it's a different.
It's true. Also true. And what do you mean by that?
I mean that I think it used to be a Beit Midrash. You'd study and pray a little bit, but nowadays the synagogue, at least here, at least the synagogue that I belong to, is kind of a center for people. It's not just a place to pray and to study. It's really it's a center for Judaism within this little. Mine is in Berkeley. I'm sure other people here belong to other ones.
There's also a question that in those cases, what is membership? Does membership mean that every individual is obligated? Every member is obligated in the synagogue. In a place, let's say Chabad, for example, that doesn't have membership. So Chabad is for every. Let's say any Jew could walk in the door, and other shuls have that also. But
right.
There is no. If somebody would never give a penny, they would still be more than welcome to, and they would just take. They would also be more than welcome. The question would be, is there? Am I? Okay, not maybe. Who in Chabad is liable if somebody falls off the shul? And probably the rabbi who raised the money and who put it together. But then, and that's how do we get to that place? That's the question.
Yeah. There's a synagogue in Jerusalem, in the old city on the Jewish quarter, that if you climb up to the top of it, you can walk around. And if it had no rail, a lot of people would have fallen off. And so there's a very practical side to that, because it's a very tall synagogue, and you can walk around it. And so there must be many others like that were built, long ago. This one I think was restored or rebuilt, but if you go around, I think this is a very practical thing.
Right.
Okay. Bye.
Anyway, I better run because I've got these little guys here.
Me too.
Okay. Have a good week.
You too.
Enjoy, and we'll see you all next week. Bye now. I see you, Shira.